Hello, and welcome to the Teaching Nano and Emerging Technologies webinar series. Today, we're joined by Dr. Jamie Wetmore, who's Associate Director for Societal and Ethical Implications at the National Nanotechnology Coordinated Infrastructure. He's going to be reviewing some activities that are designed to help you and your students discuss the societal and ethical implications of nanotechnology. So please take it away, Jamie.
Thanks, Gwen. Appreciate the intro. So we found over the years that a lot of teachers are reasonably comfortable after a bit of time presenting some of the technical aspects of nanotechnology. But when you start thinking about the social and ethical, it seems a little more difficult to jump into. I did a partnership several years ago with a group called the Nanoscale Informal Science Education Network to try to remedy this problem. Many of you probably know, if you've done this kind of work with nanotechnology, you know NISENet. You probably also know that it has transformed. It is no longer focused solely on nanoscale informal science education, but actually does STEM education much more broadly. So that's why you see the evolution in logos there on your screen. But about 10 years ago, we sat down to try to figure out how to make societal and ethical implications interesting and accessible to a wide range of people. And we initially thought it was mainly going to work with adults, but over a period of time, once we boiled things down, we found that actually it was really accessible all the way down to children as young as 5 years old. We've done some of these activities with. So the first step, just to let everybody in on the ground level, are what are the basic lessons that we want to get across? We don't ask people to solve really complex equations before they know how to add things. And the same is true with nanotechnology and society. You really need some of the basic building blocks before you're asked giant questions like, what are the possible implications of carbon nanotubes? So let me give you the quick rundown of the three big ideas in nano and society that we came up with in this process. The first one is this idea is that values shape technologies. And in turn, technology shape values. We're often told that values have nothing to do with technology. They're just inanimate objects. But actually, values are what help us decide which technologies to build, what they look like, and how they might interact with the world. And us individuals as well, the technologies that we have around us shape what we can do and who we can do it with. And as a result, our values are shaped by technology. So that's the basic lesson number one. And actually, almost all these others are riffs off of that first one. So the second one, this idea that technologies affect social relationships. I'm talking to all of you right now in a pre-recorded message in a way that certainly would not have been possible 100 years ago. So the very fact that we have a relationship is a result of this technology. And this is one way that we can really begin to see the values that are in technologies, is because we start thinking about our relationship. Finally, it's really easy to think that a technology has no impact on the world if you just think about it as an object and not connected to other things. It's once an individual technology is connected to other things that it begins to have a profound impact on our world. And so one thing we stress over and over again is to remind people, don't just look at the object, think about the network that it is a part of. And once you see that network, then you can really begin to see the ways in which nanotechnology and society are interrelated. So now, how do you get any of these ideas across in your classroom? I'm going to walk you through I'm going to walk you through 4 of these activities that we developed. Everything, the space elevator and the invisibility cloak, those work for children as young as 5 years old. The ferrofluid one, probably a little bit older, that's probably 7, 8, 9-year-olds. You Decide game, we've done with families, with kids as low as 6 or 7. You get, all of this becomes more complicated and detailed the older the children get. But actually, all of these things are interesting enough, they work with adults as well. So it's kind of an exciting series of things. The last one you'll see is the Nano Around the World. I'm going to give you a little hint about what that is like, and some of you may have played that. That's probably the most famous of all of these different activities. It is a rather involved, lengthy program, so I'm not going to go into all the details, but I'll at least give you a quick introduction to it. With that, I am going to show you a brief guide. This is available for download. I'm trying to get it without glare. There we go. This is available for download off the NISENet website, as are teacher's guides and all the materials you need, almost all the materials you need for all the things that you will see presented today. This is a basic introduction. It goes in deeper into those three big ideas that I just talked about, as well as prepares you to go into depths with these activities that you might not otherwise be able to go to. Although actually, all of these activities, the goal was with 20 minutes of reading up on the program guide, you're ready to go, you're ready to deploy it. And in some cases, it just takes printing off a handful of sheets. The first one doesn't even involve that. All you basically need is a blank sheet of paper. So let me talk about space elevators, and I will show you a little artist rendition of a space elevator. For those of you that don't know space elevators, the idea is that if we can capture an asteroid or a small moon in orbit around the Earth and then tether it to the Earth, we can actually create an elevator in which we can carry things into orbit incredibly much cheaper than we currently can. This idea has been around for a long time, and even as crazy as it sounds, NASA has actually invested a fair amount of research dollars into it. One of the huge boosts that space elevators got was the invention of carbon nanotubes. And one of the reasons there is not only do you have to hold it, attach this large object to Earth in orbit, whatever you attach it with has to be incredibly strong and incredibly light. And carbon nanotubes are one of the first materials that have gotten people really excited to believe that it might actually be possible to do. So what is the activity? So you can give the basic technical background that I just gave. The next thing, to move it into sort of the social and ethical realm,
And Jamie,
we
quick
created
question.
Yeah.
The technical background you just gave, is that part of the information that's provided to give the background for the teachers?
Yeah, absolutely. So the teacher's guide for that will give everything I just told you, but probably even slightly more accurate than I just told you. Yeah. So the question then with all technologies isn't just what does it do, but how is it used? And as soon as you move from how it works to use, you've entered into the social realm firmly and squarely and without question. So what we have kids do, and again, we do this with reasonably young children, we give them the basic idea: if you could ride an elevator into outer space, what would you put there? What would you build at the top of the elevator? And the interesting thing there is all of a sudden you begin to talk about use, you begin to talk about values. What are the things that the children you're working with, what are they most interested in? And we get a wide array of possibilities. So some of them jump right into scientific research labs, because when they think of space, they think of scientific research. Others immediately build a Starbucks. I think Starbucks is just about the #1 thing that people build at the top of their space elevators. Do they build a playground? Do they build an observatory? Do they build a amusement park? Do they build a store where you can buy souvenirs that said you were in outer space? All of these things sort of are a great starting point for a small conversation with a child about what's really important to them. And this was a huge goal of all of these projects, was trying to make these technologies matter to the people that we were interacting with, but then also hopefully giving them a voice in saying what the future of that technology might be. So if as a country or a globe, we're going to invest trillions of dollars into making a space elevator work, what do we really want to accomplish with it? So yeah. Let me move on to #2. And that is Invisibility Cloak. And hopefully somewhere below you have a link or two to a couple Invisibility Cloak videos, which is actually a pretty good way to start one of these conversations. We almost always you start with Harry Potter, since that's on the top of everybody's mind over the last 20 years or so. especially with children. The reality is that scientists are developing invisibility cloak-like technologies. The idea is you have you have some sort of surface that reads out the light coming from behind you and transfers it to in front of you to make it appear as though the person is looking directly through you and can't actually see you. The interesting thing for me, so yeah, so take a look at the videos. Many of them are very short, and they're just enough to get people's imagination going to realize that this isn't simply science fiction or fantasy. This is something that could be actually available within our lifetimes. With a young child, my next favorite thing to do is saying, okay, what would you do with an invisibility cloak if you had it? And almost inevitably, the child's eyes light up. And they begin, it's usually spying on brothers and sisters. I don't know that people actually have cookie jars anymore, but whatever the modern equivalent of the cookie jar is, that's immediately where they go to. We usually don't have any kids talking about really horrible offenses that they might create, but little things that they aren't normally allowed to do, they're out to do. The next stage then, and at this point, they're talking, again, you can get them to talk about their values. What are they really dedicated to? What are the things in life that they really want to achieve? And helping them to realize how some of these technologies could help. Then the next question, though, I think is the more important turn. And that is, what if your older brother or older sister had access to this technology? And then you see their tears of happiness turn to horror. You see the face of these children go, oh my God, that's the most scary thing I can ever imagine. And this is very weird, but I kid you not, I have had 6 years old immediately demand government regulation of this new technology. They realized that the ways in which this could make their life worse if other people had them were incredibly large. And so then you literally get into a discussion about regulation of technology, which is a hard thing to do with an adult. But all of a sudden, with all these cards played right, a 6-year-old is more than excited to talk about such a thing. So, and this is the kind of thing that could be done not just with an individual, but with a classroom as well. So I'm used to doing this with families, but I can imagine a classroom of students in which you ask one student what they do with it, and then they see if they're worried if their fellow students have it, but they don't. So definitely a possibility. All right, so activity number 3, I'm going to do ferrofluid. Now, this is the one activity that I'm doing today that you can't simply download, but it's one of my favorites, so I have to sort of do it. So this is ferrofluid, and I'll try to give you all a good view of that. Basically, what ferrofluid is, if you haven't seen it already, it is iron filings, just like the little, what do they call them, the make-a-face things that we had when we were growing up, where you make a beard on some guy using the iron filings. So these are iron filings. And if you take a magnet, you can see that you can move the iron filings around like that. And again, if we had a face, I could make a little beard on it. Ferrofluid works in very much the same way, except the particles of magnets in ferrofluid are nano-sized and they're sort of floating in oil. Well, what it also allows you to do is move them around like fluid, but as a magnet. So all of a sudden you have black magnetic liquid. Now, there's a number of different uses, and you'll find different things out there. They're used in, I think, in some of the automobile control systems. My favorite use of it, though, is my next step in the conversation with a group of people, which is to let them know that probably most of them in their pockets have ferrofluid in their pockets. And then I get them to say, okay, well, what do you think you have in your pocket that has ferrofluid in it? And usually sometimes they'll simply say, I don't have it. Sometimes they will assume their cell phones has it somewhere. But this is what I think is fun, because it shows the ubiquity of nanotechnology. So we have here a $1 bill, and I'm sorry you're not here in person to know that this is a legit $1 bill, but it is. If you take a very powerful magnet, unfortunately kitchen magnets will not do this. You'll need a stronger magnet. But if you take a stronger magnet, you will see that this dollar bill is magnetic. And it's magnetic because the black ink in US currency has ferrofluid in it. The next step is to ask the student, why is there magnetic ink in a $1 bill? Usually pretty quickly they get to forgeries. They usually realize that actually it's much more difficult to forge US currency with this kind of technology in it. For some reason, they're all really excited about the possibility that they could just drive down the street with large magnets and suck everybody's money out of their pockets. I hate to explain to them that doesn't actually work. But the other thing, which I find really fascinating as well, is that it's the magnetic signature of bills that allows a vending machine to know whether you put a $1 bill or a $5 bill in, and actually whether it's real or not. And so that usually gets them pretty excited, and to realize that it's not just there for something that they don't care about, which is, they're not going to forge these bills, but to realize that it actually helps them every time they go to a vending machine. The joke always comes out, by the way, if, yeah,
I was
go ahead.
just going to share that we will include in the comments below not only the links to all of these, and they might include information on where someone could purchase ferrofluids, but also include the a couple of vendors that I know Georgia Tech, at least for our education stuff, where we get the materials from, so teachers can check out where they might be able to find all of this good stuff.
Yeah, and in most of this stuff, I try to keep it as close to free as possible. This is the one activity that I'm just so fascinated with, that I think you can get a magnet in one of these for about $15 or $20. I don't think it's a huge expense. So yeah, it's the only reason I'm showing it off is because I like these ones so much. Oh yeah, so I was gonna say, the one joke I always get, and I don't know if you'll get this a room full of children or not, but the one joke I always get is, well, if it works well with a $1 bill, I'm sure it works even better with a $100 bill, right? The answer to that is actually no. It ends up that the $1 bill has the most black ink on it. Once you get up into 20s, and even a 5 it doesn't work real well with. It has the $1 bill has this really nice concentration of a lot of black ink right in the corner, which really does make it work pretty well. So no, it doesn't work as well with a $100 bill. And people have actually handed me a $100 bill to try it, but I don't have one here with me now. All right, so all of those are sort of basic tabletop demos or activities that you can do reasonably quickly. Again, breaking it up with, you can do all of those with an individual, you can do them all with small groups, you can do them all with even a larger group. The next activity I'm going to talk about, I actually have to rotate here to let you all see it, and hopefully my video is powerful enough so you can actually see what's going on here. This is an activity called the You Decide game. And what the You Decide game is there's a stack of about 10 or 12 different cards. And I'll hold up one of these that I'm not actually using here. So this is a quantum computer card. And on the front, it has an image of a representative image of what a quantum computer might look like, a brief explanation of what it does. So in this case, quantum bits could process information 1 million times faster. And then if you flip it over, you actually get into more detail about the technology that we're talking about. For most players of this game, all you need is the front. You get into some that are really curious to know more, and you can flip over to the back. Or if you can use the back to actually brush up on your own knowledge of the technology. But the player gets 5 of these, and then is asked the simple question, can you order them from what you see as most important to least important? And so you then, I'll do it with these 5 here. So I'm going to put my most important on the left. And hopefully these, oh, my tape's not going to work here. Well, maybe I won't move them so much in this demonstration. Hold on one second. So you have them order them from most important to least important. And after they've ordered them, you ask them about their thought process. And what you're doing here is having them link their own values with the decisions they've made about technology. So you might start with somebody with invisibility cloak, and you ask them why this is most important. They're like, well, it is my dream to be invisible. I think that would be the coolest thing ever. Therefore, I would prefer to have this technology over any other. And you're like, okay, well, that's a good explanation. And flexible solar panels, why is that number two? And they're like, well, you know what? My cell phone is always running out of batteries. I would love to have a solar panel with me at all times, or wherever I'm going, I'm not running out of batteries. So you're getting them to articulate their desires, their goals out of a technology. Now, one of the really fun things to do at this point, and if you have multiple decks of this game, you can do it at the same time, but to have multiple players rearrange the cards. So you might have, for instance, somebody who will say, no, this teabag water filter is the most important technology. There are huge numbers of people in the world that do not have access to clean water. We really need to think about what will benefit the most people. And so they'll move this one up into the number one slot. And again, they would basically reorder, and as they're reordering, you're having them articulate their values. You're having them explain how and why they're making the decisions that they do. Now, if you have a homogeneous, this often works really well with children and their parents. So you work it through with their children, and then have the parents rearrange, and you talk about their parents' changes. And you actually end up sometimes with a discussion between the children and their parents about their values, about their goals. One thing that you can also do, especially if you have a homogeneous group, is this deck of cards also comes with a series of character cards. And these character cards describe somebody, usually somebody that's reasonably different from anything that your students would have experienced, and ask them would they make decisions differently. And so in this case, if I've drawn the Iraqi soldier card and asked how might an Iraqi soldier rearrange these, you might start with the high-tech military clothing as all of a sudden the most important. Lab on a chip might become really important if they're out in the wild for a long time and might come across some possible diseases or injuries. And maybe the teabag water filter. I think the description for the Iraqi soldier actually mentions that food and drinkable water are in short supply. And so you get a little bit of tip what the needs are, but also you can sort of generally figure that an Iraqi soldier is going to be more interested in basic protection from injury than maybe the rest of us are thinking about in our day-to-day. So it's the kind of thing that at your discretion you can pull out one of these. You know, a mother in Mozambique, again, is going to have a very different set of values and goals with the technology. And getting the students to think through and articulate how all that might work. Which is one of the major goals that we had with all of these programs, which was basically, our goal is not to go around saying this technology is right, this technology is wrong, or this technology is good, this technology is bad, but really focused on the fact that technologies promote different values. And so what might be good for one person might not be useful to another person. And if we're to really think about nanotechnology writ large, let's think about, you know, who we're benefiting and how we might benefit them. Which actually leads to the final game, which I'll show you all real quickly. And actually here, as you see my nostrils as I climb into the computer. So this game requires a bit more prep, and it requires a bit more time. This one usually takes me about 45 minutes. I know it can be run in as short as 20 or 25, but to do the full thing, it's 45, which actually is pretty close to a class period. So you can run one serious 50-minute class period doing this. In this, the cards you just saw are actually riffs off of this game, which is the original one. In this one, you get 3 cards to start with. Every player gets 3 cards. They get a character card, which again describes somebody somewhere in the world and their needs and wants. They have a future technology card, which is a nanotechnology that does not currently exist, but that scientists are working to develop. And then you get a existing technology card of a nanotechnology-enabled device or system that currently exists. And basically how the game, well, the goals of the game are severalfold. One is to expose people to the wide variety of nanotechnologies that are already out there. It also introduces them to some of the dreams and visions of the future. And so things like Lab on a Chip and Invisibility Cloak are in the deck. But it also gets people to think beyond their front door. How might technology help people the world over? And so what you do is you get the players together. It's set up for 20 players. You can easily play with multiples of 20. I've played it actually with as many as 120 students in a high school at one time, which is really interesting. They're then set loose for usually about 10 minutes or so. They're basically told to get the technologies they need to make their lives better. And as they, then there's the other trick is there's no rules. So you basically tell them, do whatever you like to get the technologies that you need. Many players, and I found especially at the high school level, they insist on rules. They think there must be some guidelines to what they do and what they don't do. And as a result, they usually invent their own rules. They usually, and most players do this, they think that trading is the way that this must happen. And they go around and they trade cards, and they try to come up with some sort of narrative that explains why their character's better off. The trick is with the game is that every character in the game represents 5% of the world's population. And as a result, 10 of the characters are from Asia. Only one of them is from North America. So you begin to think about how the world at large might use a technology or might not use a technology. So you'll end up with very silly things like a Kurdish sheep herder with advanced nanotech golf clubs. And you sort of ask the player, well, what's the benefit for them? And they're like, there is no benefit. So, and there's no direct matching of the needs and the technologies. There is no magic solution to this game. The idea is to sort of show that nanotechnology is going to really benefit certain people, but probably not benefit other people unless we make the conscious decision to really work for a much broader array of people. But it leads to some really interesting and fun interactions. Not all of this will happen in your classroom, but I've seen lots of different creativity amongst the players, and that's what I really love playing this game about. So we found marriages happen in the game. Two players will decide that if they join forces with their technologies, they're better off, and so they get married. We've had divorces, so they've had to divorce their spouse that's written on the card in order to marry somebody else in the game. We've had labor unions form, international labor unions, in which the players decide to, campaign for better wages across the countries. One of my favorites ever was a player. This is actually a graduate student, I believe, who said, "Okay, everybody, lay your cards out on the table. Hold up your character. We are going to go around the room and equally distribute every technology that we have." I sort of felt like they were creating a United Nations in front of me. Unfortunately, sort of like our United Nations, it doesn't always work out real well, and it took about 30 seconds for everybody to rebel, stand up, walk away, and ignore this person. So, but it's those kind of interactions that come out that you can then talk about, because all of these are the ways that technologies get used. You can talk about the social interactions. You can talk about the international inequities. You can talk about the attempts to solve those inequities that don't always work. Oh yeah, one other thing, of course, is if you have extra cards, you sort of leave them somewhere in the room. And about 50% of the time, some enterprising player will realize that there's some unguarded technologies and they'll go down and take some. And so again, stealing IP is a conversation you can all of a sudden talk about, which you might not otherwise come up with. So again, for this game, I've only sort of scratched the surface, but there are full rules in the link that you should be able to see below, as well as all the cards that you've seen are quick and easy to print out. Then after a couple of practice rounds, you're off and running, and then you'll have your own stories about the crazy things that the players do that you can share with future rounds. So yeah. So yeah, you can go from drawing a picture of what's at the top of a space elevator to this complicated game with 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 players in which people are running around the room and negotiating, trying to articulate how and why their technologies are necessary. And again, all of this comes back to those three major lessons that you can articulate with all of these games. Again, showing the players or the participants the link between the technology and the values, showing the ways in which their relationships change when they use the technology, and also making sure that they're thinking about the bigger picture, not just focused on an artifact, but thinking about the ways in which that artifact's linked to other artifacts to make technological systems, and how human beings are an inextricable part of those systems and are affected by those systems all the time.
Jamie, that was so great. Thank you very much. I have a question out of curiosity for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You put at the top of a space elevator.
What would I put at the top of a space elevator? Oh, man, I don't, all of these games I've played myself, except that I don't think I've done the space elevator game. So what would I put up there? I think I would want an observation deck where I could look back home.
Oh.
So yeah, so I would want a deck up there where I could look through a telescope and perhaps look back and at least make out the mountain ranges near my house or something to sort of realize where I had come from to where I would be.
Oh. Now there wouldn't be much gravity up there, so I was thinking some sort of obstacle course.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
We could have like an Ender's Game room up there, right?
Maybe something a little more fun. You could also have Velcro so people could or something. Maybe if we have a space elevator, there'll be those fancy boots you see in science fiction shows that magically give people gravity.
Right, yeah, because you've gone all the way into outer space to have gravity.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was really interesting. I've been trying to think of questions for you throughout, but unfortunately I don't have any other than that. I was curious why you put invisibility cloak first, but I also thought you did a great job placing those along the screen, so maybe work that out.
Yeah, I think I put invisibility cloak first, not necessarily for me, but because with children, it's actually one that often goes first because they're so excited about the whole idea.
You could also put gecko. Maybe they need to add gecko gloves because I think kids also like to hear that they could climb a building like Spider-Man one day. That's another.
Well, so one thing with all of these is they have not been updated in a few years. Although I do check occasionally, and I don't believe anything that is in a future technology is widely available yet. We're getting close. The teabag water filter was on the cusp of being into production for about a decade, and now I haven't heard anything about it. So I think it's fizzled out. It was a South African company that was up and running it. But yeah, some of the new visions and grand ideas for the future could definitely be added and updated. Well, I mean, one thing that we actually do is we have the Nano Around the World game, the last big one that I talked about. We've had some day camps and summer camps use that game, and they make a multiple phase project out of it. So they play it once, and then they have the students come up with their own future nanotechnology cards, and then they replay the game with the new cards. And so you really get the students much more involved in thinking about the variety of ways in which nanotechnology, not just, ways in which they would hope that nanotechnology would shape the future.
That's, I wish I had some sort of authority over a summer camp because that sounds like so much to be able to do. Yeah, this was great. I think you covered a lot of material, and you mentioned in the beginning the different age groups that all of these activities work well with. And as we've both
and all the teacher guides go into detail about the right ages as well.
Great. And all the links that have been mentioned and more information will be found below in the comment section on YouTube. So check it out there. And I want to thank Dr. Whitmore one more time for joining us and sharing this information with us. And thank you for checking out this video. And you'll also find in the comments a link to the page for the Teaching Nano and Emerging Technologies Teacher Network, so you can find out more about that as well. And I think with that, thank you very much.
Thanks, Gwen. Yep, and hopefully my email's down below. If people have follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Oh, great. I will include that as well. Thank you.